In the spring of 1571, approximately 2,000 young women arrived in Moscow. They came from every corner of the Russian realm, daughters of noble families who had received a summons they could not refuse. They were participants in what Russian chronicles called the Oprichnina, the bride chosen institution that would determine which woman would become Tsarina of all Russia, and which would seal the fate of Ivan IV's third wife. The bride show was not Ivan's invention. It had roots in Byzantine imperial tradition, where future empresses were selected through systematic evaluation processes. But under Ivan Vasilievich, known to history as Ivn the Terrible, this ancient custom became something darker, a mechanism that exposed young women to unprecedented scrutiny and placed them in positions of extraordinary vulnerability. To understand what happened to Ivan's wives, we must first understand the system that brought them to the Kremlin, and the political reality that made their survival nearly impossible. Ivan IV ruled Russia from 1547 until his death in 1584. His reign was marked by military expansion, administrative centralization, and periods of extreme violence against perceived enemies. Modern historians divide his rule into two distinct phases: the early period of reform and conquest, and the later period dominated by the Oprichnina separate state apparatus that functioned as both secret police and instruments of terror. The Oprichnina, established in 1565, consisted of men who swore absolute loyalty to the Tsar. They wore black clothing, rode black horses, and carried symbols of a broom and dog's head representing their mission to sweep away treason and bite the Tsar's enemies. These men operated outside normal legal structures, answerable only to Ivan himself. Their activities included confiscating property, interrogating suspects, and executing those deemed disloyal. This was the environment into which Ivan's brides entered. The bride show process was extensive and deliberate. When the Tsar required a wife, officials were dispatched throughout the realm to identify eligible candidates. The criteria were specific: women between 15 and 23 years of age, from families of appropriate noble standing, with no physical defects or family histories that might indicate disloyalty. Foreign diplomatic accounts and Russian administrative records describe the selection process in detail. Regional officials conducted preliminary examinations, assessing physical appearance, family background, and reputation. Women who passed this initial screening were transported to Moscow for more thorough evaluation. In Moscow, the candidates underwent weeks of examination. Physicians assessed their health and capacity for childbearing. Court officials observed their behavior, manners, and reactions to various situations. Attendants reported on how they spoke, ate, slept, and conducted themselves in private. The surviving administrative documents revealed the systematic nature of this process. They could not refuse participation without bringing suspicion upon their families. They could not know the criteria by which they were being judged. They existed in a state of prolonged uncertainty, aware that their futures depended entirely on evaluations they could neither see nor influence. When Ivan himself made the final selection, the chosen woman became Tsarina and entered a position of extreme danger. Between 1547 and 1584, Ivan married multiple times. The exact number remains debated among historians, as Orthodox Church law officially permitted only 3 marriages, making some later unions ecclesiastically irregular. What is documented beyond dispute is the fate of these women. Anastasia Romanovna, Ivan's first wife, died in 1560 after 13 years of marriage. Contemporary sources suggest she may have been poisoned, though this remains unproven. Ivan genuinely mourned her death, and many historians believe she had exercised a moderating influence on his behavior. Maria Temryukovna, his second wife, was a Circassian princess who married Ivan in 1561. She died in 1569, under circumstances that remain unclear. Some sources suggest poisoning, others indicate natural causes. What is certain is that the final years of her life coincided with the beginning of the Oprichnina period, when Ivan's behavior became increasingly violent and erratic. After Maria's death came the bride show of 1571, which selected Marfa Sobakina as Ivan's third wife. Marfa's story exemplifies the dangers these women faced. She married Ivan in October 1571. Within days, she fell seriously ill. She died approximately 2 weeks after the wedding, having barely assumed her role as Tsarina. The circumstances of Marfa's death sparked immediate controversy. Ivan responded to Marfa Sobakina's death with characteristic paranoia and violence. He declared that she had been poisoned by conspirators seeking to destroy him. Dozens of people were arrested, interrogated, and executed on charges of murdering the Tsarina. The Sobakina family, despite their daughter's death, fell under suspicion and were subjected to investigation. Modern forensic analysis has provided disturbing insights into what actually happened. In 2001, Russian scientists examined Marfa's remains and those of Ivan's other wives whose bodies had been preserved in the Kremlin's Archangel Cathedral. The analysis revealed abnormally high levels of mercury and arsenic in Marfa's hair and bones evidence consistent with poisoning. Mercury was used in 16th century cosmetics and medicines, which complicates interpretation. However, the levels found in Marfa's remains exceeded what would result from normal exposure. Whether she was deliberately poisoned, and by whom, remains an open historical question. What the forensic evidence establishes is that she died from toxic exposure during the brief period of her marriage. Ivn did not remain unmarried long. He took at least 4 more wives over the following years, each marriage reflecting his deteriorating mental state and increasing isolation from legal and ecclesiastical norms. Anna Kultovskaya married Ivn in 1572. Within months, he was forced into a convent, essentially imprisoned for life. She survived until 1626, spending more than 50 years in monastic confinement. No explanation for her removal was ever provided in official records. Anna Vasilchikova became Ivn's 5th wife around 1575. She was similarly banished to a convent after a brief marriage. She died in 1577, after approximately 2 years of confinement. Maria Dolgorukaya reportedly married Ivn in 1573, though some historians question whether this marriage occurred or was canonically valid. According to one account, she was drowned the day after the wedding. The source of this story is Heinrich von Steden, a German mercenary who served in the Oprichnina and later wrote memoirs about his experiences. Von Steden's account claims that Ivn discovered Maria was not a virgin and had her killed immediately. Historians treat this testimony cautiously, as von Steden wrote his memoirs years later while seeking favor with Ivn's enemies, giving him motive to exaggerate or fabricate atrocities. Ivn's final wife, Maria Nagaya, married him in 1580. Unlike her predecessors, she survived Ivn's death in 1584, though her son Dmitry died under mysterious circumstances in 1591, an event that would later fuel one of Russian history's most famous succession crises. These marriages reveal a pattern that historians have analyzed extensively. Each successive marriage became more irregular canonically and more dangerous for the bride. Each wife faced either death, disappearance into a convent, or survival only because Ivn himself died first. The question that has occupied historians is why. Why did Ivn destroy the women he married? Why did he create systems that identified and elevated women only to eliminate them? Scholars have proposed various explanations. Some emphasize Ivn's deteriorating mental health, noting that his behavior became increasingly erratic and violent after Anastasia's death. Some point to the political pressures of his reign, the constant fear of conspiracy that made him suspect everyone, including those closest to him. Some highlight the dynastic crisis created by the deaths of his sons, which may have driven him to desperate attempts to produce heirs, while simultaneously fearing that any wife might be part of a plot against him. Recent historical work has moved beyond psychological explanation to examine the structural factors that made these tragedies possible. Ivn wielded absolute power in a political system with no effective checks on his authority. The Oprichnina created an apparatus specifically designed to enforce his will without legal constraints. The bride shows institutionalized the treatment of women as objects to be evaluated and selected rather than as persons with agency. These structural factors meant that women who entered Ivn's orbit faced danger regardless of their individual qualities or actions. The system itself was designed in ways that made their destruction likely. The excavation and analysis of the Tsarina's remains in the 20th and 21st centuries has provided physical evidence that supports the historical accounts. The toxicological findings confirm that multiple wives died from poisoning or toxic exposure. The preservation of their bodies has allowed modern science to document what 16th century chronicles could only hint at. These women, Anastasia, Maria, Marfa, Anna, and others, whose stories are less completely documented, were real people whose lives ended in tragedy. Their experiences reveal not just the actions of one unstable ruler, but the dangers inherent in systems of absolute power, where human lives could be destroyed with neither accountability nor consequence. The legacy of Ivn's reign extends far beyond these personal tragedies, shaping Russian political culture for centuries to come. But the fates of his wives remain among the most disturbing examples of how unchecked authority operates and the human cost it exacts.